like amulets and talismans work for that, or like is that just for like everyday little stuff for accidents?
It would depend on.
Like if you wear your pentagram pendant and you like wear your little amulets, like would that stop those kind of things from happening, or is that not?
I think it depends on the person, and it depends how invested they are in the actual object itself. One of the problematic things is people can be using this stuff without really being invested enough to have it work for them. You know what I mean?
Like if you charge it in with enough hours.
Yeah.
Like how do you know when it's enough hours?
That's an excellent question. I would say just keep a record of how it affects your working, and.
That's so risky though. You're kind of just like.
Yeah, but it's no risk, no reward without risk.
I started scrying just spontaneously before I even knew what it was. It's like gray mirrors mostly.
What time is it?
I got a question. Have you had any communication experience in your dreams, or know of anybody that's had anything of that sort in their dreams?
I only had something like that happen once, although I'm just not inclined to that. Crowley does recommend that people, like for example, meditate on a goetic sigil for maybe like half an hour before they go to sleep, and maybe to see the spirit in their dreams and stuff like that, because certain people are really inclined to that kind of thing. For me, that's only happened like one time, but some of my friends swear by it.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is the fact that there's no blanket sort of solution to everything. It's all going to be very dependent on the individual person who's...
That brings us back to the record, and why the record is so important in this kind of work.
So during possession, like, is it always, like, if you are in that session where you're possessed, like, is it always a blanked out, or could you be conscious?
I think you could be conscious.
Like, it isn't always a blank out.
No, it's not always like that. And sometimes I think that people are aware of the spirit's presence, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they may just lose control and think that they're doing things voluntarily, but not actually be. But this is so amorphous that it's... Yeah.
Like you talked about blacking out while you were talking to friends, and then being like, "What? I didn't say that." So did you feel like you had been possessed momentarily?
I don't know if it was a strict case of possession. In that case, I don't think it was a specific entity. I think it was more just ambient stuff getting into my head, because I was doing a lot of astral work at the time and not banishing enough, essentially, and not clearing my space enough.
Yeah, when you said that, it sounds like pretty intense. And in my head, I'm just like, why would I start down this path if all this bad shit's gonna happen?
Well, it's not all bad. I mean, if it was all bad, then, I certainly wouldn't do it. It's just, to expect to be playing around with forces like this and no bad shit to ever happen is just, it's not gonna happen. It's foolish. Like, you're learning to play an instrument, for example. You're never gonna sound good right away, and you're gonna make mistakes, and your equipment's gonna fuck up from time to time, and all those things are gonna affect it. It's just the consequences are far greater than messing up a guitar solo. But that's just the reality. I mean, I think the question is, it comes back to what I started off talking about, and inhabiting that kind of liminal space, and B, it's just like, what kind of life do you want to live? I mean, even with the bad shit, I would much rather live in an exciting world where this kind of shit happens to me than boring day-to-day life. Like, wake up, go to work, watch TV, go to bed. Like, that's boring as shit.
Great shit. So is there like different amounts of power with these different types of workings? Like it's poetic, workings more powerful than just candle magic?
I think it depends what you're trying to accomplish.
Like, because you can get money with candle magic, so why bother?
Different people are inclined to different systems. I mean, personally, the reason that I emphasize Goetia so much is I am particularly inclined towards evocation, and I find it very much easier to get a result using that system. Whereas there are other people who are a little more earthy in their nature, who they're much better with making talismans and amulets and stuff like that, and it's just more effective for them. That's why in Crowley's system, in the outer college of the AA, you experiment with all these different systems and record the results of all these different systems just to find out what you're good with and what you're not.
So how do you know it's not just like practice? Or is it just kind of intuitive?
No, I'd say, I wouldn't say it would just be intuitive. I mean, you know, you check your record, check your results, and keep going and revisiting your record, because there are times that you can do a working and not realize what the result was until a lot longer afterward, because it might not always be obvious right away, and you're not going to know that without checking your record. I mean, really the only way to figure out what works best is to experiment with different systems and just record the results.
What about as in the idea of trying to find your true will? Like, can the demons help you with that?
Yeah, I think in the sense that I don't think they're directly the best source of information for that, but in the sense that when you're talking to them, you are, in a sense, going to be exploring your desires necessarily, because you're sending them on little missions and asking them to do things for you. So those are all indicators of where your true will is going, like what you're willing to throw the energy into. And it can be done reasonably quickly, but I mean, we're looking at a few hours at least, you know, to do one of these evocations, and that's an investment of time and concentration and materials if you're going to get the sigils and stuff like that. And it's like, well, you know, if I want what the spirit has, do I also want to shell out for material? Like, how bad do I want this? You know what I mean?
And I had a secondary question, but I think demons stole it.
With a lot of stuff I've done, I find it very draining because I do a lot of channeling and like talking directly through my body, and then like.
Yeah, that can be tremendously
Yeah, that's
draining.
pretty hard.
Okay, I was talking before about
Hold on. Sorry, I know what my second question is.
What was that?
So we've had lengthy discussions where we've talked about how like these things aren't really like demons in the traditional sense of what we understand them to be.
Yeah.
Like if you were to grow up or just even watching a horror movie or something. So what do you think they are? Like,
I have opinions. I couldn't tell you exactly.
what are your opinions of
My opinion would be essentially like, if you look at angels, and the reason I think that they describe them as fallen angels, angels are kind of like, I always describe them as like God doing shit, you know, because God, in the concept of God, is an infinite concept, so he can't like do stuff like a big dude who walks around, you know, knocking down trees and poking stuff. So the angels are sort of the manifestation of that. I think they're part of the essential machinery of the universe, and I think why the fallen angel metaphor works is because these beings, or the way it was explained to me at least, because there's a few of these demons who their role is to tell you how the other demons fell, is that they just become disintegrated from that sort of cosmic unity, and they're in a sense disconnected or like shut out from that unity. And that's why that they only work through cracks or through creating errors or through creating mistakes and stuff like that. One of the ways that it was explained to me was in certain cases, if a certain form of matter or certain material objects gets used too many times to invoke a spirit, there's some spiritual residue left behind, and that kind of develops its own self-awareness, but it's disconnected or whatever. That's, you know, that's what a demon told me anyway. So
because there's lots of talk about how these things were previously gods, and then kind of were, like, even the whole story is that they were like cast into this like urn or whatever.
Right.
And, like, so it's like, how could it, you know, how do you think that's literally what happened, or do you think that's some sort of metaphor that kind of explains it?
that's, I don't really even have an opinion about that. I'm like not really sure. The problem is like without historical verification, then it's not clear. So it could be literal, it could be a metaphor. I wouldn't even feel like I have enough information to weigh in on that one, honestly.
Okay.
Have you looked too much at the kind of Gnostic stuff, like the lost books of the Bible? And,
Yeah. Because that's where these guys come from, is the Thelemic book, of which I'm not even sure there's a existent full interpretation, but
because all of that stuff kind